Hello and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. I'm Rausan Pereira. You are watching UPSC Corner. Since you're here, I would like to thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. The Bharata First team runs a big picture daily quiz. For those of you who would like to participate, may do so by going through the description of our big picture videos. Do follow our social media handles to get the latest news and updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and make a contribution. A small contribution that you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. All this information along with the other recommendations are in the description of this video. So please go through it. Now it's time to meet a special guest. Someone whom I first met about 6 years ago on the sets of Rajya Sabha TV. He is a friend, philosopher, and guide, and I'm really lucky to have met him in my life. A person who has a heart of gold and never loses his cool. He is a retired IAS officer who was secretary in the Commerce and Industry Ministry, Government of India. It is a pleasure to welcome on UPSC Corner Mr. Ajay Dua. Mr. Dua, welcome to Bharata First and welcome to UPSC Corner.
Thank you very much, Frank, and thank you for the generous comments. Thank you much.
So, the program is all about the UPSC, the Indian civil service and what it means to you and what advice and what you can give, what vision you can give youngsters who may want to follow in your footsteps. So let's take a walk down memory lane and start from the beginning. 1971, 50 years now since you first got into the UPSC. How has the journey been?
I would say memorable. I was looking for a proper word, and memorable for good and the bad both. And I would say mostly good, but no journey is complete unless you have seen the other side as well. And I was happy that I trekked along this journey, both at the center as well as in the state, with about equal amount being spent in the state as in the center.
So do you remember anything about how you prepared for the exam? What was it really? What made you look at a career in the Indian civil service?
Interesting question. I had studied in a college called St. Stephen's College in Delhi, where it had become a habit to write the civil service exam. And I must say the college had, over the years, probably cornered a fair amount of seats in the civil service and the foreign service, and these two services in particular. So one, it was for us somewhat of a routine thing to appear for particularly those who had studied liberal arts like I had in college. And second, there was a little bit of a family reason as well. My elder brother was already in the IAS when I wrote the exam. And it was following his track that I ended up, and with his guidance, etc., I ended up writing the UPSC examination in the year 1970, for which the process got completed by April 71. And we were up in Missouri by July of that year.
Do you remember anything of the interview, Mr. Dua? How did it go? Was it challenging? Butterflies before you went for the interview? What was that experience like?
Right. Frank, I would call it somewhat vividly. I remember the chairman of my interview panel at the UPSC was one Mr. Hari Sharma. though the chairman of, he was a member of the UPSC, but I think that on that particular day or that week, the regular chairman, Mr. Sarkar, who was known to, who was a civil servant, could come, and Mr. Hari Sharma presided. He was, if I remember, Frank, he was about 5 feet nothing in height. So what when he, you had to really look, you know, from your chair, look, lean forward to be able to hear him as and see him. Uh, but I would say a highly confident person who dominated my questioning during the interview. And he started by saying, Mr. Dua, and they addressed you fairly formally, but all these UPSC interviews, they put you at ease in the beginning by asking you questions which they know you can answer or something which will make you at home. And Mr. Hari Sharma did that extremely well. After that, he tells me, you are a student of economics, I find, from your, you've done BA, MA, and you're studying for your PhD, etc. But uh, he said, I like to understand why do we produce a lot of steel in India, and why do we also import? What has gone wrong? So it sounds a very straightforward question, and but what he said obviously showed that he had a deep knowledge of the industry, and and I think I was able to probably satisfy him when I said, "Sir, steel is not one uniform product. The
Hmm.
raw material might be iron ore, which we have in plenty in India, but the usage is steel is more of a generic name for different kind of products come up. One, the industry which the steel which is used in construction, the so-called rods which we see, and tor tors, that's called tor steel, whereas what the steel which gets used in producing automobiles is entirely different. It's a lightweight steel but yet very strong, tensile, etc. So Asad, you are absolutely right. What we are doing right now is producing more of general purpose construction oriented steel which goes in for apart from infrastructure, the low end uses. But for all our high end uses, we had just set up the HEL at that time, some steel which was probably required for aluminium, mixed steel required for uh, uh, aircraft building, etc. I said that is the kind of steel which is imported, but we certainly also export steel because at that time infrastructure building wasn't at the pace which it is. He seemed to feel very happy about it, and short of telling me thank you for your lecture, he said, I have for the first time I have understood why it's happening. And obviously he would have known all these things extremely well, but we was testing. And
Right.
then straight away moves forward to, I had offered, though I was an economics student, we had to at that point of time take at least two subjects which were not in the economics course, because the maximum subjects you could take was economic, two subjects of economics. You had to take three something else for economics people, and for the history walas, as we used to call them, they could find all five within the history, world history, European history, Indian history. So we guys in economics had to study something else. So I had offered for the exam a paper called British history as a lower paper, and a higher paper was British constitutional history. So obviously they had some marks, etc., of ours paper-wise before, also before them by then. So he tells me, I find that you are an expert in British constitutional history. And I correct him straight away by saying, not an expert, sir. Just about I studied it to write this examination. No, 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 you seem to know it well. And then why I said that he had the exams, was when the final exams came, the results came, I was done really well in British constitutional history. Probably you don't get to know, but when you talk among your fellow colleagues, probably the highest there. And he says, I'll I keep wondering what would be the status if some country like India does not, or some country refuses to recognize the Queen as the Queen of the Commonwealth as the head of that state. So he says, I said, certainly, but I was a little foxed because we had already done it, India. So yet he's
Hmm.
asking me a question which was, there was a law of Parliament, British Parliament, 1932 Act, if I recall, Westminster Statute, which talked about the formation of the Commonwealth and the role. I said, sir, uh, after thinking about it, that what is it that he's trying to ask me? I said, sir, I don't think we should look very far. Starting with India, we've done it. Then thereafter, another country, I forget that time, probably I knew has also done it. She is the Queen of Commonwealth. She is the head for us in Commonwealth matters, but we have our own president. She is not the head of state. She might be the head of state in Australia or in Australia or in Canada, and Sri Lanka at that time used to have a governor general, etc., even though it had become a republic. So I said, it's for us, we decided beforehand, at the time of independence, we let the English know that we will be having our own president. So, and I thought that it was, in my mind, I thought it was a stupid question. But why is he asking when we have this example? And but he obviously was trying to see whether I could apply the theoretical knowledge which I had studied shortly, and the reply which he gave me continue to unnerve me during the rest of the interview as well as later. He said, "Why should we worry? Queen has got enough high-paid advisors; they can tell her what is the status." So he did not say whether I am right or wrong, but he bypassed it by saying, "Don't worry about it." I could think that I was wrong in the reply. I could be right. There was no appreciation. And later, when I mentioned this to my brother, who was a history student himself and in the IAS, and to somebody else, he said they were just testing resilience, saying put a person down if he's looking overconfident, while replying that, like, probably steel question, you lectured him too much, or the board. And here he was trying to ask you to see whether, if left under a bit of pressure, how do you react? Because he says in the civil service and others, you would have fair amount of such issues where you are under pressure, nobody is appreciated, yet you are supposed to follow the straight narrow path. So
Right.
the so I think the my giving these two examples, Frank, is to just let your listeners and the young students, young aspirants for the civil services, to know that in the interview, they're not really looking for your academic knowledge and others which you have been tested. That's why you have reached that stage of a personalities test. They're actually more looking for your broad knowledge. That steel question was to know whether what's happening around me, whether I'm familiar or not. And then similarly, that how would you react under situations of pressure? It was not tremendous pressure, but for that point of time, at that point of time, I was probably a little confused. And then he wanted to see how do I conduct myself in the rest of the interview. This had started, he had started off with these two, then he passed me on to the other persons. But at the end of it, probably I withstood my ground and didn't let that affect me. And he seemed to be very happy, and he did say, "We are happy with you," and he ended that you had a good interview. I think the
Absolutely.
from him was as good as that. And as I said, he was from Frank, way back, you may not recall, that before the state of Punjab was formed, there used to be a state called Pepsu, Patiala and East Punjab. State Union, they were got together in 1956 and the state of Punjab, Pepsu was formed. He was from the Pepsu civil service, got into probably the IAS later, and he was the people who had worked for the Patiala king, a lot of those his courtiers, senior court members, etc., were nominated to the IAS, and because soon after independence, he was probably one of them. So he had, so to say, come from the ground, and he knew how to be able to test people. And I think probably I passed, I passed muster with him. That's how I'm in service.
Not probably, you did pass muster, and that's why you got into the service. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten in. And the answers clearly, got him to think about a few aspects as well, which was good. So you spoke about Masuri, Mr. Dua. Let's talk about that and how that experience was. Was it just as you imagined?
Yes, let me put it this way, with all of us coming with different academic backgrounds, and some people had even worked, of course, because you could join in at the age of 24, up to the age of 24, and you could also, if you were in the reserved categories, the age limit went up at that point of time to 28. So people had come with some of them with work experience, many directly from college, across the different curriculums with different interests. So that foundation course of 3 months, which we have at that point of time, from July to October, everybody getting into the civil service qualifying, and we would be about 250 to 300 of them, us, and 77 from the IAS, and 20, about 12 from the foreign service, and the rest from the other services. So getting the common subjects of administration were taught there, public law to everybody. Well, the when I say public law, some we have never studied law, so uh, criminal justice, evidence court, and I would say it was a extremely well constructed foundation course, but that used to be only till about 1 o'clock in the morning, from 9 to 1, starting with a horse riding or PT, so for physical training. Where I was fond of horse riding, we weren't so looking forward to the physical training exercises early morning, particularly if the previous evening had been a long one. The rest of the time we spent amongst ourselves, and a lot of it, and including our little salary that which we used to get, was used to be spent at a place called the Whispering Window, which was the only bar in town, and the fairly close to at a place called Library Point, walking distance from our academy. And the shopkeeper or the barman, considerate as he was, he had allowed all of us to open accounts in anticipation of our salaries, and that's where I think we made lots of friends amongst one another, and also learned to talk about things which we did not, each one of us probably didn't know. I recall that with great amount of relish. From October to next April, we were supposed to be only the IAS 77 of us there, but our course was cut short in December there because of the India Pakistan war over Bangladesh. And our training lasted only 3 more months there, and we were packed off to our respective states, which had by then been allotted to go and spend a longer time in field training of 1 year, which was not envisaged earlier. So the following year, we spent a year followed by 6 weeks of Bharat Darshan, and then we came back to Missouri for a final lap in 73, where again we were only the IAS persons to wrap up and write our departmental examinations. So ours was perhaps somewhat unique because of the Bangladesh war, but yet I would say it gave us a longer time in the field, a year, and the at least the state I went to, and I'm sure many others were also. We had a training academy in Bombay. The director was a person called G.A. Sharma, whom endearingly called Gas because he never stopped talking. The late Mr. G.A. Sharma, but he was extremely fond of teaching. He had worked in the Bombay. He was an IS officer of the old Bombay presidency, which included Gujarat and Maharashtra, later divided, and he would also expect us to send him a monthly report on our district experience, which he would comment upon. Visited all of us in the field, meaning I'm talking about the Maharashtra cadre, the 10 of us who went there. And I would say, again, that was a useful ad hoc arrangement which the Missouri Academy and the state government, along with the federal government, Union Department, Ministry of Personnel, would have worked out. I enjoyed it. In the second lap, I was a little. In March, when we had to go back in '73, I was delayed because I had lost my brother in a car accident, the elder brother accident. So I joined a little late, but I certainly was there to write the departmental exams, etc.
Right. So let's talk about the your cadre, Mr. Dua, and the Maharashtra cadre. So how was it like going to Maharashtra and taking on the role of a bureaucrat there for the first time? Was it challenging? Was it something that you were looking forward to? What were some of the difficult moments?
The difficult moments were to get out of the so called, I would say, the relaxed life of a Delhi University, St. Stephen's College, as also of somebody who, meaning I'd done a year, I'd spent post my MA year doing my PhD. So getting away from the academic world, so to say, to face situation on the ground. But I was lucky that I had a collector, Mr. R.L. Pradeep, I still remember his name, in a place called Jalgaon district. Jalgaon is the entry point for the trains from Madhya Pradesh coming into Central Railway route, coming from Ranpur, Khandwa district into Maharashtra, who was a veteran. He was probably the longest surviving collector of any district in India. He'd already done 5 years. So he, I think, continued this wholesome training for me, he made me stay when was first staying separately. He said, "No, I have an outhouse. You have to stay there." And then he said, "Every meal you have to eat with me." That very few collectors would do in order to make you feel at home. And he was doing exactly that, saying, "Here is a guy who was urban, so to say, from a English-speaking background of college, etc. And here he had to be brought down to earth, a job which Mr. Pradeep did extremely well. He certainly allowed me to play tennis, and he played himself a good game. So that was the only, I would say, kind of similarity to the background. But the rest of the grounding was extremely well, and I think it stood me in good stead. I remember two or three things, Frank, and this is more for my young friends. Within a month of my finishing training, I was posted in a district which is now called uh, Raigad, with Alibag as its headquarters. But that time it was called Kolaba, Kolaba, unlike the Mumbai Kolaba Causeway, which is
Mm.
sea. And the Maharashtra had a concept of district ministers. So our district minister was Mr. A.R. Antule, who was hailed from that district, was Minister of Building and Communication, but it was a guardian minister appointed, and Antule Sahab was the minister for us. Very first public meeting, and as an SDM, I was expected to attend because he was a guardian minister. So here there were some villagers complained to him saying that the road connecting the village to the highway is that Bombay Goa highway. This
Mm.
district is that the connecting road is poor, and why is the road not being repaired? The question was addressed to him because he was the building and communication of the PWD minister of the state. So instead of that, he passed on the question to me. He knew how to duck these questions. So he says, "Mr. SDM," in public English speaking, and he also didn't know Marathi too well, like I didn't, but English, Hindi, Marathi mixed, which was saying, "You better look after this road, repair this road, otherwise I will suspend you." My service, I had just started in service 7 or 8 days ago. Here was my suspension order publicly being issued. Not that he had jurisdiction, but in order for his political gains or electoral gain, that he's an effective minister, he said, "If the road is not repaired within 1 month, I will suspend you." So at the and this thought that saying by before my service has started, I am already under a threat of suspension. I raised it with him when we drove back to the rest house, a place called Mangaon, which is on way to Ratnagiri, Goa, etc. At that place, he said, "How are you? I was looking forward to seeing you, etc." All he was a bar at law barrister, so he could change his tune. He could, when he wanted, he could talk very good English, polite, etc. So I said, "Sir, all that is very fine that you're looking forward to me, but I was trained here for a year, and I was told that we have as SDM, we do not have any role in construction of roads. If it's a village road, it goes to Jila Parishad, which is under somebody else, not under us, which is a elected body, or if it is a high state highway or a district highway, the BNC makes it. And but why did you announce, sir, then that I'll be suspended?" He says, "You don't understand. We have to always to appeal to the public, turn around and find who's the senior most person, and we take action. We announce action against it. So I will suspend you many more times in the future. You don't take it to heart." So this is how my career started, and I remember it. Mr. Antule thereafter, of course, became a little more serious at suspending me when once or twice I had to let him know what the correct position is. And I did that mistakenly in front of his followers, saying, "Sir, this is not correct. This is a position which that no politician likes, and certainly not from a greenhorn like me." So the first lesson which I had was right or wrong, swallow it when it comes from a politician. They have different goals than you do. But if you try to be smart, or if you try to be kind of not appear servile, the consequences can be serious.
Absolutely. so that's how it started within week 1 or 2.
Yeah.
So as you progressed, Mr. Dua, in the state cadre, what was the most challenging assignment for you, and how did you overcome it?
Uh, the I again after being an assistant collector or an SDM, I was posted as a chief executive officer of the Jila Parishad in a place called Aurangabad.
Mm,
And that was a natural progression in Maharashtra. After SDM, you become a CEO of Jila Parishad. That is where and before you become a collector. This is Maharashtra, Gujarat, and some other states. They had that intervening, that not straight from assistant collector to a collector, but through the Jila Parishad. And I think the Jila Parishad had been set up in Maharashtra in 1962 or so, and the state was set up in 1960, as you know, Maharashtra, under an act where the elected people were given lots of powers. And the CEO, that is what our post was, we were expected to work under them and guide them. And every evening, virtually, there will be a Jila Parishad meeting which was open to the public, and the Jila Parishad members could ask questions of the administration, CEO, my district health officer, my social welfare officer, my agriculture officer, etc. Again, one had to eschew their taking credit. You had to only bat on the defensive, as you know, friend, that they save your skin rather than trying to win, score a boundary, or score a six, or try and say that I am a Sachin Tendulkar or a Gavaskar in making. There are a lot of clashes would occur with the Jila Parishad officials. Here was a president of the Jila Parishad, very close to then Chief Minister of Maharashtra, Shri Mr. Shankar Rao Chavan, who later was a Union Home Minister, Finance Minister, External Affairs Minister, and he was the guardian minister of the, no, as CM, you are not the guardian minister, but he hailed from Nanded, a place close to Aurangabad. So these guys all had a direct access to him. For the smallest of the matters, if I didn't do, they will sign up a petition and it will be given to Mr. S.P. Chavan, saying, so one day Mr. S.P. Chavan, who was otherwise knew that I was doing my work properly, had received a long-winded petition from all the Jila Parishad persons, including the president, saying, we don't want this person, you remove. I understand it worked this way. That petition he marked to the chief secretary, who was a well-known, very well independent-minded officer called Mr. J.B. D'Souza. Before that, chairman of the electricity board and Maharashtra and the chief secretary. So he looked at it. He probably made his own inquiries with the divisional commissioner, who said, no, he's a very fine. He probably said, no, I'm a good guy, etc. So he takes it to the chief minister, and he said, "Sir, I will. If you don't want him, your people don't want him, I'm willing to withdraw him, but I refuse to conduct an inquiry. What you have written against the allegations, please inquire against the young officer who's on the right track." So the chief minister said, "Yes, you must." Mr. D'Souza also was a little bit of one of those guys who, if he what came to his mind, he will want to do it, right or wrong, and he would get into problems. But with Mr. S.P. Chavan, somehow he was getting along, so he asked Mr. D'Souza, "What do you have in mind?" He said, "Sir, I would reward him rather than punish him. I want to post him as a collector of a district straight away, even though he's not even done 1 year as a CEO." And Shankar Chavan said, "Yes, agreed, go." So Shankar Rao served his purpose by getting a cantankerous person like me out of the way. Chief Secretary is happy, saying he's not demoralized a person. I was happy that I was the first person in my batch, though I'd done a little well, so I was the first in seniority in the state. I was made a collector a year and a half before my batch was. But again, I'm saying the lessons from it were far more important than the fact that happened. That in Maharashtra we realized that you have to downplay your work, downplay your achievement. You have to let the politicians who were at that time empowered but did not have the responsibilities which today, through amendments to the Act and in practice, have been placed upon them. So
Mm,
we had to anticipate, we had to be cleverer than at that point we were, because here it was just a coincidence for me that Mr. D'Souza, the Chief Secretary, who didn't know me from Adams, decided to stand for me. But he was looking at it as a larger issue of morale of the civil service, etc. But many other chief secretaries would not have, they would have just given in. And certainly there are many today who would just listen to the politician and the chief minister and to let go of the person who might have been affected. I would rate
absolutely.
that as one of a learning experience. I wouldn't call it a crisis, but it certainly taught me a lot of lessons for the future. And
Absolutely.
helped me, I would say, thereafter navigate my way through in Maharashtra as also in the central government, where, as I said, about 50% of my tenure was spent in the central government in three different ministries: industry, power, labor, back to industry.
Absolutely. So
Industry. Yeah.
let's talk about that journey, Mr. Dua, and at the center, and how was that for you? And did you like it more than the state? First and foremost. Secondly, what stood out for you as during your tenure at the center?
Well, let me put it this way: as when I joined my first assignment in Government of India as Under Secretary in the Ministry of Industry, I had a little bit of an experience because I had done a year after collectorship in Maharashtra in the Industries Department already before I had moved to Delhi. The past knowledge did most undersecretaries coming from the IAS would not be have a field experience or a state experience because you became an undersecretary between 6 and 9 years of service. I had by 6 years already done a collectorship because it was shorter and the not the CEO's experience was shorter, etc. So I came with a bit of an advantage, and lucky for me that the then minister, one Mr. T.A. Pai, you would be familiar
Hmm.
coming from Bangalore, that he was the original founder of the Syndicate Bank, was the minister. Somehow or the other, he had heard about me in Maharashtra since he or before that the LIC chairman and headquarter was Bombay for before Indira Gandhi appointed him as the industry minister. So he had taken a liking and straight away the found that I could understand some of the issues which otherwise people had to be kind of groomed for. The secretary, again a very good person, Mr. S.M. Ghosh of the Gujarat cadre, kind of started dealing with me directly. While these were the good points, as dealing with an undersecretary is very unusual for a secretary, but he would call me and say, just to make me feel to chat with him. We, and that gave me, I would say, things while he is working himself. You throw in a question. When I said, "Sir, may I leave?" He said, "No, I haven't released you. One more coffee." So that kind of a thing. I would say I was lucky, but what stood me in great stead was the overview of things, how a minister works, how a secretary works. I'm sure my joint secretary, etc., to whom I was directly reporting, didn't say anything to check me, but they were obviously not happy. So I had to again learn. By then, I had learned the balancing act a little better than earlier. That so I would report what was the conversation with the secretary, what did the minister want, etc., and of course make sure that none of my files or none of my submissions to the seniors was ever made without going through the joint secretary. So you had to go through the rigmarole of convincing your immediate boss, etc. And but the difficult part was to be telling the joint secretary and the minister secretary was telling the joint secretary what the secretary and minister has in mind, as if
Mm,
they would probably resend it, saying, "How is a youngster telling us about our bosses what he or she has in mind when we are supposed to be knowing about it?"
right.
So again, I say the civil services is an entire one long game of balancing, uh, balancing between different, balancing your approach in different situations.
Absolutely.
I was
And
very happy
also,
with the industry ministry where, but by then I had been in the state, came back as a joint secretary. Learned a lot because it was the first time I was in the power learning about electricity. It was new for me, and there again one had to kind of uh, I was made the joint secretary for policy and international aid, so it was a lot of interaction and preparing for a new electricity act, which later on subsequently took many years, came up in 2003. The talking to the World Bank, ADB for assistance for various power projects in India, and at a time when the policy for privatization for power had just been announced, that had happened in 93, but not much action had taken place so far. So, kind of making sure that how the monopoly of the public sector gets diluted, private sector is allowed to come. That was the role in the beginning, goal, but finding that the private sector was reluctant, private sector needed lot many assurances, including borrow on the capital which it was borrowing domestically or international. So we didn't see much traction in private power at that time, but it was tough to make sure that the power situation in the country in 90s for the future doesn't get disrupted by just because the private sector has been opened up and the reliance on private sector is increasing. So, and then during that tenure, Frank, was lucky. In addition to being joint secretary, I was made the chairman cum managing director of two large companies, one after the other. First, the Rural Electrification Corporation, a charge additional for me, which continued for 6 months or so. But the longer was for 2 years. I was also the chairman and managing director of the National Hydropower Corporation, in addition to being the joint secretary, because the government couldn't decide on a regular person in both these jobs. That was, I would say, unusual, and that gave me a lot of ground knowledge of what I was supposed to be doing in the ministry. I was joint secretary in charge of hydropower, but not theoretical. Here I was also the national chairman of the National Hydropower Corporation. Most of the work which had to be done with the states, which I enjoyed doing.
absolutely.
And then, of course, finally was the Labour Ministry, where I was in charge for Social Security as the Director General of Employees State Insurance Corporation, and finally in the Ministry of Industry, where I spent 3 years.
Absolutely.
That was my second tenure.
So, Mr. Dua, looking back and looking at how things are today, how would you say the civil service has changed?
I think Now, two things come to my mind, Frank. I'm speaking of, offhand. One, the civil servants now can't take anything for granted, including about the job that they are in. There is now competition from technocrats for the jobs which they are doing, particularly in ministries like Power Ministry, I mentioned. The not just because it's technical, a little bit technical, but because we do have people who are equally competent and have the domain knowledge which most of us had to actually acquire when we moved to that ministry. And as we were, you know, never allowed really to have a second or a third tenure in the same job. I was probably lucky in the case of industry. But the unless we put in that hard work to get the domain knowledge, that means put in that extra bit of work rather than just talking about bossing over because you come as a joint secretary, so you boss over a director of the company, private or public. You're not going to be respected. You have to be able to add value. I would say that's number one. Number two is that today it is no longer kind of the unacceptable to be to talk to the private sector if that industry in which you are working or if that sector of the economy or the society we are working where a role is expected of the private sector also to play. Having said that, in practice it has become difficult because most bureaucrats, young and older, have been talking in terms of too much of diffuse responsibility. Oral instructions, the seniors not willing to commit, seniors includes the politicians as well as sometimes many a bureaucrat, not willing, senior bureaucrat, willing to give you a straightforward yes or no reply on file. Also, too much of accountability to the auditors, too much of accountability to the vigilance departments, and also too much of accountability to the media. All these things are necessary individually, but if you look at their total weight, every bureaucrat has become very circumspect about what he will be doing. Here I give you an example once again, Frank. As the chairman of the National Hydropower Corporation, I had to write a letter to the government, and there it meant I wrote a letter to Mr. Dua. That was to myself as a joint secretary from chairman. Chairman is Mr. Dua. Saying, I want Mr. Dua, I want permission of the government to open up hydroelectric projects, you know, uh, dams, the sluice gates they are called, from the where the water is held up of a project in Jammu and Kashmir, which was NHPC of uh, at a place called Salal, SALAL, very critical to Jammu and Kashmir. From most of the power, Jammu and Kashmir used to come at that time. I'm talking about the mid 90s, only from there. In the government, I put it up to my secretary. My secretary, very fine person, put it up to the minister. Minister said, this deals with Pakistan. It's got Indus Commission aspects, etc. We are the upper riparian state. We can't open the sluice gates, etc. without Ministry of External Affairs telling us so. I still remember Raja Dinesh Singh was the foreign minister. My minister came with me. He explained it. He said, yes, Jammu and Kashmir cannot be allowed to be in darkness. Mr. Narasimha Rao is the prime minister. And he says, but this has to go to the PM. So a small little issue which I had raised with myself, but in different capacities. I said, look, this, that. And my general manager in Salal, one very fine person, Mr. C.L. Gupta, ringing me up saying, sir, because of this mud in the river on which this project is built is getting into the turbines, and turbines get hot, there could be a breakdown of the project, and whole Jammu and Kashmir will go into dark. And terrorism, etc., was at its peak at that time. And I am trying to tell my secretary and all the like, here the case is put up to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, again, along with the minister, foreign minister, and others. We went to brief Prime Minister Narasimha Rao. I'm naming him. Prime Minister Narasimha Rao said, "Yes, I understand." And he was a man of very few words. Understood? He turns towards my secretary who was there. He said, "Bring a cabinet note." So here on a simple matter, everybody is pushed it down the line. A presentation is made to the Union Cabinet. The Union Cabinet hears it, and I was present to assist my secretary in the cabinet. Only the secretary speaks amongst the bureaucrats to assist in giving the material, etc. And as soon as the final presentation bit, I assisted him in completing. The direction I get is, "You have not come to the cabinet." I won't say who said it, which meant here is a clearance, but none of us is willing to commit it in writing. You go ahead and do what you like. So this is how I have given it one extreme. I had no option, but that very evening, my divers were ready. I had got naval divers from Bombay, etc., positioned there, and I said, "Go ahead, you do it." So what was it? What was it? I took the risk upon myself because I can't tell my general manager or the divers, etc., others who wanted it in a written order. They can we open the sluice gates or not? Because a lot of mud will go into Pakistan. The river will get muddied. Pakistan will definitely get to know there could be an international crisis. But they here was the, and I would say there's clarity in my mind that everybody wants to do it and it is essential, but nobody is putting his uh, you know, as they say,
Signature.
signatures anywhere, including the Union Cabinet. I have informed them. But so this kind of a thing, I think I could be hauled up. If there was a slight crisis, I would have been out of service. Somebody had to be sacrificed. They would have said, "Who's this errand chairman who did it on his own?" If it had become an international incident, because the World Bank had brokered the 1960 Indus Water Commission deal, and World Bank was still the arbitrator.
Yes.
We had not informed Pakistan, and Pakistan had said, "Why were the sluice gates opened up?" So I'm just giving a long-winded example just to say these kind of incidents, what for me was the first time at such a senior level, must be galore now. And so the bureaucrats have to take that call of their consciousness, of their conscience, or they have to say, let it go. If the government is not willing to put its foot down on a particular matter, why should I be insisting? The whole process from the time I had raised it to the time I got the gates open was probably 4 months.
Hmm.
Everywhere things had to be on. It was a 4-hour job. Once there, I told him to do it. I flew that night to Jammu and Kashmir just to hold their hands. I said, in these cases, my guys or others will say, "Look, here's the CMD is also not here, and he's asking us to do it." We
Hmm.
spent the night there, and 2 days later, we were lucky. All that rain occurred. It diluted the mud going into Pakistan. So the incident was over. But that was a risk one thought was well worth it. But I would say that was fun also, adventure also. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to narrate this story to you in such length if it didn't happen. Such experience wisen you are.
Absolutely. And if you already don't know, Mr. Dua has the memory of an elephant, and he has much more such stories to narrate. And we've discussed many of these stories off camera as well. Many of them can't be narrated on camera, but maybe in the form of a book, Mr. Dua, that can come out, and these wise words of wisdom and also these anecdotes and stories can always come out. Maybe in the form of a book, it will be a bestseller.
Thank you, Fram. I've actually thought of the name, My Formidable Masters.
Yeah, it already sounds interesting, and I know most of these stories of these formidable masters, so I know that it will be a bestseller. Mr. Dua,
Thank you.
before I let you go, let me also tell the viewers that Mr. Dua is a man who never loses his cool. I've always seen a smile on his face, come what may. I remember a nasty fall that he had in the guest room of Rajya Sabha TV once because the flooring had gone bad. And he immediately sprung up to his feet with a smile on his face, telling us all not to worry. We were worried because of his age, something might have happened, but he was as any youth would behave. He behaved, he was just like that and immediately had a big smile on his face. So that is Mr. Dua for you. So, Mr. Dua, before I let you go, words of advice for youngsters who may want to follow in your footsteps.
Frank, I would only say that as a youngster, knowing what is in store for us is certainly, or what can be in store, we should certainly uh, kind of prepare for it. But at the same time, there are all that I would say is there are always in life uncertainties. You can't prepare for all situations. If somebody ever talked to me about saying that even a union cabinet is not going to give it in writing to you, but uh, I would have never imagined. No, no talk preparation in Missouri, nothing in the districts would have prepared you for this kind of a thing. At the end of it, you are all alone. And if you think what you are doing is right, I'm sure you will get vindicated because at the end of the day, there's somebody above all of us, and that's the Almighty. He looks after you, and He look after you.
Absolutely. Mr. Dua, pleasure having you on the program. Thank you for sharing all those anecdotes with us. Thank you for taking us through your life's journey as a bureaucrat. Indeed, a pleasure having you here on UPSC Corner.
Thank you, Frank. I enjoyed being with you, and I hope your listeners would find it equally enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. That's all the time we have. See you again next time. And before I leave, once again, thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a daily big picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in big picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution that you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. All the information along with some more recommendations are in the description of the video. So please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time.